I'm standing there in like shock, like what the fuck?
He wanted a little community of slow killers. Oh my gosh, this is so crazy that he's being accused of this.
A young man takes off on a cross-country journey in hopes of achieving a fresh start. He's optimistic that this is his chance to make things right for his family, and he can feel it. Everything is about to change. Unbeknownst to him, however, his path will soon take an unfortunate detour. It will intersect with an individual so incredibly evil, they would later be described as a serial killer in the making. It was June 17, 2017, when 18-year-old Hunter Tash Smith left his home in Junction City, Oregon, bound for Nebraska. There, a steady job that could help him to provide for his infant daughter was awaiting him. He'd led his family to believe he'd be traveling by Greyhound bus. It could be that he didn't want them to worry. In actuality, he had elected to hitchhike. 3 days later, on June 20th, he updated his friend in Nebraska, whom he planned to stay with on arrival. He was in Burns, Oregon, and was catching a bus to Idaho. Around this same time, Hunter's aunt, Raquel Messer, received word that Hunter had been picked up by a nice couple. Apparently, they were so kind that they allowed him to stay the night in their home, giving him a chance to clean up and get a comfortable night's rest. The plan was to drop him off at an Ontario, Oregon bus station the following day. And then, all contact with Hunter came to a screeching halt. It was the next month in August when Hunter's friend in Nebraska contacted Hunter's mother, Heather Smith. The friend was worried. It had been weeks since she'd heard from Hunter. Immediately, Hunter's family filed a missing persons report. It was August 4th. And then, nothing. 4 agonizing months passed since his family had last seen him, and still no word from Hunter. On October 21st, a development came, but it was the worst kind of news. Human remains were found by hunters in an area of the Bruno Desert in Idaho, Oregon's neighboring state to the east. The cause of death appeared to have been anything but natural, and based on the estimated age of the deceased, Idaho State Police believed that the remains could potentially be those of the missing young man. DNA from Hunter's mother was compared against that of the unidentified body, and the confirmation soon came. Sadly, the remains were those of Hunter. With the terrible news, the family's worst nightmare became reality, and all hope that he'd someday return was lost. The situation was beyond comprehension. What could have happened to the young father who was eager to start his new life? The story behind Hunter's horrendous demise would soon unravel, along with unbelievably shocking revelations about the monster whose path he tragically crossed. The question why any of this happened in the first place will be answered, but understanding the bizarre motive is another thing entirely. In the county of Owyhee, rumors began circulating about the disturbing find. One particular lead, out of the many received shortly after news of the somber discovery was made public, captured the full attention of law enforcement. A man by the name of Nick Vandenberg had shared a local news story on Facebook. "This is close to where I live," Nick commented. But it was his next comment that really raised eyebrows. "If it was me, I wouldn't have left him in the desert, lol. Too much risk of hunters stumbling on a dead body, lol." Not exactly the kind of thing someone expected to read about such a tragedy, especially posted publicly. As law enforcement followed up on the leads that had rapidly filtered in, they were soon led to a young woman by the name of Montana Reed. She'd been living with Nick in his home until recently and was his ex-girlfriend. Montana agreed to speak with detectives on October 24th of 2017, 3 days after the remains were located. First, they addressed how it was that she came to live with Nick in his home.
Halloween night of last year, I moved in, and I was getting a divorce, and so I just, me and my husband were leaving my mom's house. I couldn't live there anymore. So he offered me a place to stay, and so I was meeting his friends and everybody.
It seems it wasn't long before the detective got down to the heart of the matter.
I couldn't think of him hurting somebody like that.
Why do people say that he's violent and is capable of doing that?
Because he went to military. He talks about little stuff from the military, and he's been in a few bar fights.
Nick has claimed that during the course of his service in the Marine Corps, While stationed overseas, he'd engaged in combat. As a result, he'd had to resort to taking lives. Montana gave some additional background on Nick and explained that his upbringing had left a lot to be desired.
His growing up, I don't know if you know, but like he was in and out of foster care and all this other stuff, and so...
As it turns out, Montana wasn't the only individual Nick welcomed into his home.
What about his roommate?
I couldn't see Keith hurting anybody either. Keith just had a baby, and he's, he's been in jail. He doesn't want to go back at all.
33-year-old Willie Keith Raby is a man who we'll hear from shortly. As it turns out, he's also on law enforcement's radar, for multiple reasons. Montana continues to describe her dealings with the two men after living with them for an extended period of time.
Neither of them ever showed a violent side to me.
So far, Montana can only speak highly of the two men. Of course, as you'll see, this won't always remain the case. The detective then poses an interesting question to Montana.
Have you seen the news article that came out about the body that was located?
Yeah, I've seen lots of people post on Facebook from around that area, and that it was right out there where we lived, kind of.
He's trying to get a sense of how much Montana knows.
And where were they saying the body was located?
I didn't look exactly where, but everybody, I know Nick posted on there. He was like, that's pretty much in my backyard. I mean, and it just said that the Bruno Desert is where it was found.
Why would Nick talk about this, that he did this to this person?
I don't know. He's not necessarily a show-off, I guess. I don't know why he would be talking about something like that if he didn't do it. And if he did, he's not... Oh my gosh, this is so crazy that he's being accused of this.
No one's accusing him yet.
You just suspect that he did it because people are talking about it.
Did he ever talk to you about the term bunny bumping?
Bunny bumping?
Going out and shooting rabbits in the desert.
Yeah, we did that.
Did he ever talk about going out with Keith?
They went out lots. I mean, not lots, but...
The detective asks where they enjoyed going out to shoot, and coincidentally, it seems they frequented a spot near the Bruno Desert, according to Montana, near where Hunter's body was found. At this point, it seems the detective is narrowing in on the suspect.
Point blank, if you knew that he did this, would you tell me?
Of course I would. I don't want to get in trouble for that, for keeping that.
I don't know if Nick did this or not. There are things that point that possibly he did, which means he's a bad person. Or he could not be. So again, I'm trying to reiterate, stay away from the guy, okay? Don't talk to him about this. Don't talk to anybody about this. Something happened, whether he had something to do with it or not, I don't know, but he has told people that he has.
That's crazy, oh my gosh.
Montana continues to express her shock that Nick's name has come up in relation to Hunter's death. The detective concludes the conversation, and Montana may think this marks the end of her involvement in the matter. However, the following day, the detective and Montana meet again, and as you'll see, she didn't heed his advice.
I talked to him talking about this stuff, and then that's why I called you.
So you talked to Nick after you talked to me?
Yeah, I told him, because he messaged me, so I tried to, keep it short.
While it is possible that Montana is innocent and is simply trying to look out for her friend, going straight to Nick could also suggest that she's involved and wants to ensure their stories line up. If the detective wasn't suspicious of Montana before, he likely is now.
I don't know if I'm allowed to ask this, but I'm guessing since you're talking about the guns, the person that was found was shot. Am I allowed to ask that?
We can't comment on what we have,
but that's a possibility.
Let's focus in on what you do know.
Okay.
Interestingly, stating that they can't comment isn't actually true. There's usually no rule that would prevent the police from providing details to a potential witness. However, officers will often be strategic about the details they do divulge. Many times, police will want to wait to hear a witness's version of events. This serves two purposes. First, it ensures that the witness's statements aren't influenced by the detectives. Second, if the witness provides statements that the officers already know to be false, then they can use these contradictions in the interrogations. As it seems they aren't making much progress, the detective begins to lay it on thicker.
I'm glad you called me last night, but I still find it strange that you would even care to even stop and talk to Nick after I've disclosed to you that he is suspected in killing somebody. I can't tell you what we know, but I know you would have been living at a house when this happened. And I don't know how you wouldn't know at least something. Something happened in that time frame between, say, around the 4th of July and the month leading up to everybody moving out of that house.
Of course, Montana can explain it all away, as she's been doing so far.
Keith was on the run. We told him that he needed to go serve his time. Everybody did. But he didn't want to. So I know that Nick pretty much, I don't know if he told him, but I know that Nick didn't want him at the house if he was going to be on the run. I moved out because we were having some issues and with our relationship, mainly with the Letitia girl. And so one night we got in an argument and I just had it, so I moved out the very next day.
Make a mental note of Letitia. We'll hear a little bit from her later. As of now, the detective is curious how Montana and Nick's conversation began the previous day. Apparently, they've been texting each other frequently. Unfortunately, Montana is unable to show the messages to the detective. Apparently, she routinely deletes all of her messages. These having been erased alone wouldn't make Montana guilty of anything. However, if combined with other evidence, the prosecution could use this to show something called consciousness of guilt. This is evidence that shows that a particular criminal defendant knew that they had done something wrong and were conscious of their own involvement. For example, destroying evidence of a crime. A common misconception is that once you delete something from a phone or computer, then that file or message is permanently deleted. However, this is not the case. Until the underlying data is actually written over, it can still be recovered. As Montana has continued to stick to her story, that she can't believe Nick could be involved in such a terrible crime and that she has no information to share, the detective kicks things up a notch. And as you'll see, Montana does have some details to share after all.
The truth's going to set everybody free, okay? I know you know something. I'm looking at you right now, and I know you do.
And with that, Montana makes a shocking statement.
I was there.
With this revelation, there's no question about it. Montana has been lying.
I don't want him to be in trouble. I don't want him to go to jail. I don't want to go to jail.
This marks the point where everything changes course. Montana has a mountain of information to provide, and it definitely won't be setting anyone free.
I know one day, Nick came home with this kid. I don't know his name. He said that he picked him up and he was a hitchhiker. And we were gonna feed him dinner and let him take a shower, and then Nick was gonna drop him off at another place.
If you recall, the last word from Hunter was received around June 20th. The detective asks Montana when Nick picked the kid up.
Give me a time frame, summer. Was it about this party time that we're talking about?
A little bit before.
Okay.
The kid joined them for dinner. After that, they were going to show him a good time.
The kid had never went shooting rabbits. We talked about all of that sort of stuff. He had never went hunting, really. And he never went shooting rabbits, so the guys were going to take him out, Keith and Nick. So that was their plan, is they were going to take him out to go shooting and then go take him up to Mountain Home. When they got back, he wasn't there anymore. And
You didn't go with him to shoot rabbits?
Not that time.
What did Nick tell you about this?
All he said was that they took him out shooting and dropped him off in Mountain Home.
But you said you were there. You know this happened. You're in now. You're on the right path.
The detective asks her if she would be willing to call Nick while he covertly listens in.
Yeah, I can do that.
It's worth a try. According to a statement the detective made earlier, Nick has been eager to talk to other people who have then shared information with police.
So the police left me a message asking about the body.
They wouldn't say that in a message.
Why would they be asking me?
I don't know.
I don't know either. Do you know anything?
No.
When someone's voice goes from a lower tone and ends on a higher tone, it often means the person is questioning something or lacks confidence in what they're saying. It could also mean they are being disingenuous or are simply caught off guard. His upward inflection here is a red flag because this should be something he's certain about, which would be demonstrated with a firm tone of voice rather than his less than confident no.
Does anybody that you know anything?
Not that I know of. Everybody I talk to doesn't have any idea what's going on. We're all trying to figure it out too. Because that seems really suspicious to me that they would call you and talk about a body in a message. They would just ask you to return the call.
If anything, it seems the call is making Nick suspicious of the whole situation.
They wanted to know about the body, and they said that it involved possibly that hitchhiker that you brought home. And you, and I told him that I'd have to call him back later. What's going on?
I don't know, Montana.
Okay.
I don't have any idea.
What happened to the hitchhiker?
I don't know. What's going on?
Because I just want to know. I want to know why they're calling me.
You already know. You know everything I know. So why are you asking me?
Because I just want to ask you because I don't know what to do. And I'm nervous and...
You have nothing to be nervous about.
Okay.
I picked up 100 hitchhikers over the last 3 fucking years. So, it doesn't make any sense to me.
Okay. I gotta go.
Okay.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Unfortunately, the call didn't include the admission the detectives had hoped for. The following day, interview number 3 with Montana kicks off.
You recognize that gentleman?
That's the kid. Mm-hmm.
How certain are you?
Pretty certain.
You're sure that that's our missing hitchhiker?
Looks exactly like him.
Okay. Well, I can also say that I'm 100% sure that that's the body we found in the desert.
Mm-hmm.
It's all starting to crash down on Montana, and she has to know it. Also on this day, detectives also finally catch up with Keith. As you'll see, he's definitely not eager to talk. As Keith has had 3 unrelated warrants out for his arrest, he's been made aware that he will not be heading home after this interview. These warrants are not of interest to the detective. He has more pressing things on his mind.
We have been looking for you because you are not a suspect. You are a witness to what happened that day.
The detective starts the interrogation with some simple questions.
How long have you known Nick?
So, like I said, I've only known him maybe 5 or 6 years.
But you grew up in that area out there in
Grandview, but I don't think Nick really went to school, and he's quite a few years younger than me, so I didn't really hang out with kids that were super young, you know what I mean?
Already, Keith is attempting to distance himself from Nick. The question is, why would he find it necessary to do so?
It's going to be a good relief for you, I think. It's just tell us what happened from the beginning.
As Keith is about to start telling the story, he rubs his face and eyes, which is considered eye-blocking behavior. Not only is this a sign that he's uncomfortable, but it also acts as a barrier between him and the detective. As well, it can be an attempt to avoid having to look into the face of the person who he may begin lying to.
So Nick had called, I think I was at work or something, and I was going to get home late. Nick had messaged me and said that he picked up a hitchhiker, and he brought him back to the house.
but I knew it was going to be a while before I got there.
That's not how Montana recalled the evening.
Keith wasn't with Nick when Nick picked him up. I think Keith was already at the house.
He started messaging something like he needed to, and don't quote me on that. These aren't his exact words.
Okay.
It was just in reference. It was something like he had like basically like a thirst to kill or something like that.
Things are looking worse for everyone at this point. Montana and Keith's stories aren't lining up, and Nick allegedly has some very alarming urges.
And at first, well, throughout the whole fucking night, I thought he was just fucking joking. But then when I showed up at the house, his persona was different.
It wasn't the same Nick that you normally...
No, it wasn't the same Nick.
And there was a hitchhiker there?
Fuck yeah, there was. We started driving and we started shooting rabbits. And then I remember we go up towards like the Bruno Canyon maybe.
And in the midst of this story, Keith reveals something that perhaps he wasn't supposed to reveal.
And like Montana, she was sitting in front of me.
This admission from Keith is definitely not consistent with her story, at least with one of her earlier versions that she told the previous day.
You didn't go with him to shoot rabbits?
Not that time.
In this third interview, she must realize that the walls are beginning to close in.
You haven't been honest with me. I know you haven't. I went back, I listened to the calls, and I listened to their interview yesterday. You were there when this happened. I have to put Nick in prison, whether you like it or not. And you're going to have to help me do that. Will you do that and tell me exactly what happened?
Yeah.
As her self-preservation instincts kick in, Montana's account changes yet again. And as you'll see, she knows much more than she originally let on.
So I didn't watch it happen. I looked away because I didn't want to watch it. Keith was in the car with me. He was in the back seat.
There's now a consensus between the two. Keith and Montana were both present at the time of the murder.
Nick let the kid get out and go shoot at a rock.
That kid wanted to shoot one of Nick's bigger guns, rifles. So he's firing it, and
What's he shooting at?
just rock and nothing. There was no rounds there. He was just firing it just so he could fire it, I guess.
What happened next was absolutely chilling.
I don't know, I just happened to fucking be watching them. And I seen the kid empty out that gun, and he spun around, and I looked over at Nick and I seen him with his pistol. And it was down at his hip. And it was pointing right towards him. The kid was maybe a little bit farther than that door.
From the wall to the door?
Yeah, a little bit farther from Nick.
Okay.
And then Nick pulled the trigger and shot him right in the stomach.
And Nick got up out of the car and he shot him.
The kid threw Nick's rifle down, and Nick waited till his gun was empty.
That rifle was empty.
Yeah. And the kid couldn't fire back.
And I know that the kid said something.
The kid was screaming, "Why did you do that? Why did you do that? Don't fucking kill me. I have a kid. Don't fucking kill me." And he fell onto his back, and he was trying to kick at Nick, because Nick walked up to him.
And then he fired off 2 more shots.
And then Nick put 2 rounds in his head. I'm standing there in shock, what the fuck?
The accounts match up as far as Nick shooting Hunter, but then the versions veer off in different directions. According to Montana, Keith was in the car with her at this time. Keith continues with more heart-wrenching details of the savage ambush on the unarmed young man.
And he turns towards Nick?
Turns towards Nick and is walking back.
Towards Nick?
Towards Nick, and he gets shot right here.
Okay. In the side of the stomach?
No, it was right, maybe below the rib.
Okay.
And he drops the gun and he's holding himself.
And he's standing up?
He was standing up, yeah, and then he had like tripped and fell on his back.
Okay. And Nick walked up to him?
And Nick walked up to him.
And this kid's saying, don't shoot me, don't
Yep.
shoot me, whatever he's saying?
Yep. And Nick puts 2 rounds in his head.
What happened, what did Nick do after he shot him in the head?
Looking for casings.
Hmm?
He's looking for his shells.
For the pistol?
For the pistol.
What kind of pistol was it?
1911.
What caliber?
45. The Lord's caliber.
When it seems Nick's acts have reached peak malice, he takes things to another level, which can only be described as horrific.
The kid was still breathing.
Even though he'd been shot in the head?
Yeah, twice. He was still breathing. So Nick point blank shot him again in the face. And he stopped.
And with that, Hunter, referred to by Montana and Keith only as the kid, was dead. You've probably noticed that Montana and Keith continually refer to Hunter as the kid or the body. These are their attempts to emotionally distance themselves from Hunter and his murder.
This is what I don't understand. Why would you put someone, me and Montana, in a situation that I sure as fuck don't want to be in? I don't know about Montana, but I don't want to be in that.
What did you guys do? And I'm saying as a collective, maybe it was all him.
Conveniently, that's where the story's headed, for now.
I'm so fucking, like, what the fuck? I don't have a gun, and I sure as fuck, I can't just fucking pull the trigger on somebody, you know what I mean? I know it wasn't directed towards me. I know I probably should have fucking done something, but I don't know what the fuck to do.
Apparently, Nick knew exactly what to do next.
He's like fucking tearing the fucking kid's clothes off because the kid was in our house. Nick's wanting to take all the clothes off except for his underwear because he sat in our house in the fibers. Nick's a smart fucking dude.
So he stripped him of his clothes?
Yeah. Put it all in the bag and burned them.
And then he asked Keith to get out and help him undress him, and they drug him off. I did not watch. I didn't want to watch. I didn't want to be a part of it. I didn't even know what was going on.
He says, help me drag this body over. It's like, fuck, dude, I don't want to do this. And I did.
Nick likely wanted him to help clean up because the more involved Keith was, the less likely he would be to report him. If he tried to implicate Nick, then he would be implicating himself as well. Despite their efforts, both Keith and Montana are more involved than they claim to be, and the truth will soon start to show itself as more shocking revelations are made.
After it all went down, Nick went through his belongings and got his ID.
What happened to the ID?
I don't know. I have no idea.
He kept the license of the kid. I don't know where he put it. I don't know if he still has it, but I know that he kept it.
This behavior can be a warning sign of a potential serial killer, and an indicator that if given a chance, he would kill again. As the detective is starting to put the pieces of the puzzle together, he wants more information about the motive behind the brutal killing. Obviously, there's no real rationale. So what drove Nick to commit such an unconscionable act?
You told me that it's like he had a thirst for blood.
Yeah.
So what makes you tell me that? What was the basis of the context that would give you?
I can't remember exactly what was said, but it was along the lines of, this kid's a liar, and I'm going to end it, or I'm going to end him, or something like that.
According to Keith, Nick's comments were in the form of text messages sent to Keith while Hunter was a guest in their home.
Did you have the idea that something bad was going to happen to that kid?
I don't know. It's kind of like mixed feelings. Like, just because Nick was saying that, I didn't really expect that shit to be fucking going to happen that way.
However, that's not what Montana says.
But what happened? What transpired with Nick? Because what I'm being told is Nick was going to kill this guy, and he had planned on doing it. Hey, did you have any idea that this was going to happen?
I know that Keith and Nick talked about it, and they told me that something was going to happen, but I didn't know what. And once we got out there, I figured it out. I know that after the fact, he would talk about doing it again. That it was a stress relief. or talk about finding a random person driving down the highway in the middle of Idaho, like on the highway from Idaho to Nevada, and just finding a random person and acting like the car was broke down or something and killing them and driving their car off into the desert and burning it on fire.
The reality that Nick was an aspiring serial killer is all too real. Keith's interview is concluded and he's taken into custody as a result of his unrelated warrants. However, when it comes to his involvement in the murder, the investigation has just begun. There's only one person left who can answer the detective's remaining question: Nick. Detectives then catch up with him that same afternoon on October 26th.
Hey, the reason we wanted to talk to you is because of a body that was found out in the desert.
I heard about that. I actually saw the notice on Facebook, the press release from
Okay, well, some hunters found this body that's out in the desert, right? And contacted the police. They asked us to assist with them. That's why we're here.
Okay.
And we're trying to track down any and everything that we could find out about who this person may be. Okay, and what happened to this person.
Nick is holding his body very still, which may indicate that he is in fight or flight mode. When someone encounters a threat, they may freeze momentarily. This is an instinctual response in order to minimize attention, much like an animal may stop all movement when they realize a predator has spotted them.
Your name came up as somebody that we might want to talk to that might know something about this.
Why is that?
Now, I got to tell you straight up, I can't tell you a lot of stuff. I'll tell you what I can. Would you happen to know anything about this body being out in the desert?
I don't know. No, I don't have any idea. I know some people a while back thought I saw a notice saying that a hitchhiker that I had picked up had gone missing.
Nick has thoroughly prepared his story for this interview. So far, he seems confident that he's got this one in the bag.
Nick's a smart fucking dude.
As you'll see, though, the interview will begin to head in a different direction shortly, and not to Nick's advantage. Nick readily relays his encounter with the hitchhiker to the detective.
I asked him where he wanted to go, because I'm obviously not going to drive him to Nebraska. And I said, well, if you haven't eaten, if you're hungry, whatever, I can take you home, make dinner. I got to make dinner anyway. And I can bring you back to town tonight or in the morning. Save you that much time. And he said, all right.
Nick explains that Hunter ate dinner with Nick, Keith, and Montana. Then they all went out to shoot rabbits. His account is consistent with the others so far, but then Nick throws in some new information.
Came back to the house. He had made a comment about Montana. I was not excited about his comment about Montana. Some sexual stuff about wondering if she would sleep with him and all this. And I said no, because at the time Montana and I were semi-seeing each other.
Okay.
I took him to the Chevron Mountain Home. It was after dark. I don't even know what time it was. Took him to Chevron Mountain Home, gave him $20 cash, two $10 bills, I think it was. And that was the last time I saw or heard from him until somebody said they seen a missing poster with his name on it.
This is the first we've heard in relation to inappropriate comments, so it's likely that Nick may have added this in to paint an entirely different narrative. He wants police to believe that he's a kind stranger that took in a hitchhiker and made him dinner, only dropping him off at a gas station in Mountain Home, Idaho, after he supposedly made Montana uncomfortable.
What would you think if I told you that I thought the guy that was out there in the desert is the same guy?
The same person.
That you described to me.
I think that's kind of crazy, to say the least. A little uncomfortable at the same time. Because that would instantly point a finger at me, being the last person that saw him, had a meal with him.
It's going to be difficult for Nick to explain away the next question posed by the detectives.
What would you say if I told you that he was out in that general area that you described to me as well?
Around Shoofly?
In the desert out there, yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't know.
Is it well known out there for people to go out there?
Yeah, all kinds of people go through the desert out there shooting rabbits or
whatever. We did talk to Montana.
Mm-hmm.
And she told us some of the same stuff that you've said, but some of it's a little different.
Okay.
We talked to Keith.
Okay.
And he told us some stuff too, but some of it's a little different.
Okay.
Okay. So that's why we wanted to talk to you.
I understand completely.
Okay. The story they told us has a different kind of an ending.
Really?
Yeah. So we want to talk to you about that and see what the ending really is.
Okay.
Nick is clearly feeling the pressure. He may be realizing that this version isn't quite cutting it.
You know, the story that we were hearing is that the hunter never came back from that hunting trip.
Really?
Shooting rabbits.
Most likely a strategic move, the detective exits the room for a few minutes, then returns and directly confronts Nick.
I know you were involved in what happened with him. Now, hold on. Let me finish it. I'd like you to tell us the truth. I know that you guys were out shooting rabbits.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I know that. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
There's not a doubt. I know that you guys you had picked him up as he was hitchhiking.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? I know that you had some drinks, smoked some weed with him, took him out for a drive, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I also know that at the end of the drive, he stayed there. And he stayed there because he was shot. I know that. I also know that he was shot with a 1911 45.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Which you had.
Okay, yeah.
Okay? I also know that you shot him.
Then the tables turn and Nick poses some questions of his own.
And why would you say that?
Because I know that.
How do you know that?
I have the proof. I have the 45 bullets. I also have witnesses that were out there that said that you did it.
Nick has dug himself quite a hole. Now that he sees he's not going to get out of this, he attempts to provide a new story to the detective, one that will get him out of trouble. And as you'll see, it's unbelievable.
Do you want to tell us about what happened out there?
Yeah. But we were out there shooting rabbits, drinking, and we got out. He had said he wanted to shoot. He shot at a rock. He just started shooting at it. And I was like, don't shoot at the rock. Like ricochets happen. And he said, it'll be okay. And he turned around, and I was standing just outside the driver's door, and he turned around and I heard the gun click. And I reacted.
And what'd you do?
I shot him. I went back to the same thing I was trying to do.
In the military.
Mm-hmm. And even afterwards, Keith looked at me and he's like, that wasn't you. And I said, well,
And
I mean, in a way, that is me.
So Nick did shoot Hunter, but according to Nick, it was simply a reflex. After all, he'd been trained to react in the military. Nick makes a last-ditch effort to assassinate Hunter's character, having already confessed to actually assassinating him. While going through Hunter's belongings prior to burning some of the evidence, Nick claims to have made a shocking discovery.
He had grabbed my stuff from the Marine Corps. I have a set of dog tags and a little crystal image of myself from boot camp. Mm-hmm. And then my ribbons.
he had that stuff in
and
his...
it was in his backpack, along with a set of my hunting knives.
Really? So he was in the process of stealing from you.
And that just pissed me off even more, I think.
Okay.
Quite obviously, the detective isn't buying any of it. As the interview is about to come to a close, Nick recounts the gunshots that ended Hunter's life.
You got the one in the stomach, and then the one in the face. And I've heard so many people struggling to breathe, and I couldn't listen to it. It's just one of those kind of triggered me. So just double tap real quick.
To his head?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, it was a mercy killing. You'll soon hear from Montana that this story has no merit whatsoever.
In the 1911?
The one I shot him with is buried in the desert.
Okay. Where in the desert?
I'm not going to tell you that.
Okay.
You'll never get that from me.
Okay.
Refusing to disclose the gun's location could be a show of power. Nick already confessed to killing Hunter because of the evidence against him. However, the whereabouts of the gun is something he can control, especially if he's the only one who knows the location.
Feel better to get off your chest a little bit? The whole situation didn't even weigh on me. I don't know. The easiest way to explain it would be like putting a mask on.
It seems that in this moment, Nick is the most honest he's been the entire time. openly telling the officers that the murder he committed hasn't bothered him in the least. When he says it's like putting on a mask, he's likely referring to the manipulation and deception that he uses in his everyday life to blend in with the average person.
Well, you have to be arrested.
I completely understand. I'd prefer you read me my rights first, though, on the tape with everything else.
I'm not going to read you your rights right now because I'm not going to ask you any more questions. Okay? But we are going to arrest you. All right? So do me a favor, turn around and put your hands up on the wall there.
Nick is taken into custody, and though his conversation with the detectives is concluded, he definitely isn't done talking. He calls his mother while in prison, and it seems he still believes he can beat the system.
Hello?
Hello?
What happened, Nick?
Well, for right now, it's murder one.
I know. Who was it?
It was that hitchhiker.
Why?
There's a lot that went into it, Ma.
That's why you were so infatuated with it. That's why you called me, isn't it?
With what?
As soon as you knew that body had been found.
No. Anything I got from me yesterday isn't going to count for shit anyway.
Why is that?
Because I never read me my rights.
We get some interesting insight as to how Nick thinks when he gloats that because he wasn't read his rights, he believes that nothing that he said the previous day can be held against him. He is sorely mistaken. We can assume Nick was not in custody when he came to speak with officers. If the police ask you to voluntarily come down to the police station and don't place you under arrest, you aren't in custody, so everything you say can be used in court. Unless you're in custody, there is no legal requirement that the police read you your Miranda rights. A few days later, ironically, Montana meets again with the detective for one last interview. And boy, does she have some interesting information to share.
He talked about doing it more afterwards, like going and on Highway 51 out in the middle of nowhere and acting like his car was broke down and then end up killing whoever stopped and taking their car out into the desert and burning it on fire.
We've heard this story before. However, this time, Montana has some horrifying information to add.
He talked about doing that. He talked about picking up more hitchhikers. He told me and Keith that it was our turn next. He wanted a little community of little killers. And I went along with it because I didn't know what else to do.
Knowing now that Nick's plan was to commit more murders, a chilling question is raised.
Did Nick kill anybody else?
Not that I know of. He never talked about it. I never went after that. He just said that he wanted to.
Did he pick up any hitchhikers that you know of?
After that, no.
And in the question that follows, the detective provides some intriguing information regarding Nick's alleged service.
Did he ever, besides his fake Afghanistan stories where he said he killed people, which aren't true, did he ever talk about killing anybody outside of the military? Yes,
he did. He said when he lived in Caldwell, people would hire him, kind of. They would pay him to go take care of people that they didn't like.
As horrifying as that admission was, it seems that this was another case of Nick lying about what were, most likely, acts he'd merely fantasized about committing.
There has been a warrant for your arrest.
Okay.
We'll take you from here. You'll get booked into the Twin Falls County Jail.
Okay.
You'll be arraigned probably tomorrow. And you'll end up being transported most likely to the Owyhee County Jail. Keith's also just got arrested today too. You knew that Nick did. Nick did confess to this. The case against him is unbelievably strong based on what we've found.
Despite this claim, Nick continues to believe that he has the upper hand. In a jail call recorded a few weeks after Nick's arrest, he and a man believed to be his father discussed the case against him.
I don't know if they've got all their ducks in a row yet.
I don't think they do. I don't think they do.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. I don't think they got it all together, and I don't think they've given enough Evidence to do a whole lot.
Nick also spoke to his new girlfriend, whom you might remember Montana having mentioned, a woman by the name of Letitia.
I moved out because we were having some issues and with our relationship, mainly with the Letitia girl.
Letitia was on the same page with Nick and his father. Apparently, Nick caught wind of an element that was to be used in the case against him. An incriminating find had surfaced.
Went to court this morning.
Yeah, how'd it go?
I talked to my attorneys, and apparently they're trying to use text messages, a group message between me, Keith, and Montana about shooting rabbits behind the barn.
Okay.
They're trying to use that as a plan to commit murder, basically.
What? About shooting rabbits?
Yeah, behind the barn,
In fucking Bruno, Idaho. Shooting rabbits behind a barn. That's a plan?
apparently.
Give me a fucking break.
In the end, despite his certainty that he would beat the system, Nick elected to take a plea deal. In late August of 2019, he was sentenced to life for first-degree murder. He will serve 30 years before he will be eligible for parole. Montana pleaded guilty to criminal conspiracy and failure to notify authorities of a death. In December of 2019, she received a sentence of 15 years in prison, with a possibility of parole after serving 5 years. Earlier that year, Keith pleaded guilty to accessory to first-degree murder, evidence destruction, and failure to notify authorities of a death. He was sentenced to 26 years and could be eligible for parole after he has served 11 years.
Psychological analysis of a thrill killer. The case of Nick Vandenberg. Introduction. In June 2017, a seemingly ordinary young man's journey collided with the dark intentions of a budding serial killer. This essay presents a comprehensive psychological analysis of the crime that unfolded. The cold-blooded murder of 18-year-old Hunter Tash Smith by Nicholas Nick Vandenberg in the Idaho desert, and delves into the criminal mind behind it. Using the detailed account of events and interactions leading up to and following the murder, we will explore the psychological behaviors exhibited by the perpetrator and his accomplices. The case of Nick Vandenberg is not just about a single murder. It provides a window into the psyche of a thrill killer in the making. Crimes like this, often referred to as thrill killings, are exceptionally rare and perplexing. Unlike the majority of homicides, which typically involve personal disputes, financial motives, or crimes of passion, a thrill killing appears to lack a traditional motive entirely. This absence of clear reason can make such cases hard to comprehend and investigate. Yet, as rare as they are, thrill killings have occurred enough times that criminal psychologists have identified common patterns and traits among the perpetrators. By examining this case, we can compare it to those patterns and gain a deeper understanding of what drives an individual to kill for pleasure. This analysis will cover the background of the perpetrator and victim, the sequence of events of that fateful day and its aftermath, and most importantly, examine the behaviors, motivations, and mental processes at play. We will look at the evidence of psychopathic traits, thrill-seeking motives, manipulative tactics, and the group dynamics between Nick Vandenberg and his two acquaintances, Montana Reed and Willie Keith Raby, who became unwilling accomplices. The interrogations and legal outcomes also reveal much about the guilt, denial, and personality of those involved. Throughout the essay, we will reference established concepts in criminal psychology, such as the notion of a thrill killer, signs of psychopathy, trophy-taking behavior, and the psychological impact on accomplices to contextualize what transpired in this case. By the end of this analysis, we hope to shed light on how someone like Nick could commit such a heinous act without remorse, what warning signs were present, and how his mindset compares to known patterns in serial and thrill killers. This is a journey into the dark recesses of a criminal mind, attempting to make sense of an otherwise senseless act of violence through the lens of psychology. Case overview, background, and context. In the summer of 2017, 18-year-old Hunter Tash Smith embarked on a cross-country trip from Oregon to Nebraska. Hunter was described by family as an optimistic young father, determined to turn his life around for the sake of his infant daughter. He set out to find steady work in Nebraska, aiming to support his family and start anew. Unbeknownst to his loved ones, instead of taking a Greyhound bus as he had claimed, Hunter chose to hitchhike part of the journey. This fateful decision would put him in the path of Nicholas Vandenberg, a 26-year-old man living in rural Idaho. Nick Vandenberg resided in the small community of Melba, Idaho. To those around him, he might have appeared as an unremarkable young man, perhaps even a good Samaritan when he offered a ride to a stranded teenager. However, as events would show, Nick harbored a dark and violent impulse. He had a troubled personal history, one that included boastful lies about military combat and a fascination with firearms and hunting small animals. Nick had served briefly in the U.S. Marine Corps but never saw combat. Despite this, he often told stories of having engaged in deadly encounters overseas, cultivating an image of himself as a battle-hardened veteran. Those who knew him, including his then-girlfriend Montana Reed, noted that his upbringing had been difficult and that he possessed an intense, if not disturbing, interest in guns and killing. The fateful encounter. On June 20th, 2017, Nick encountered Hunter Smith, who at that point had made it to Oregon's eastern border near Idaho. It appears that Nick, possibly accompanied by his friend Willie Keith Raby and his girlfriend Montana Reed, came across Hunter hitchhiking and decided to pick him up. By all accounts, Hunter was relieved and grateful for the ride. Nick played the role of the kindly stranger, offering hospitality to the young traveler. He invited Hunter to stay at his home for the night, providing him with a meal, a shower, and a place to sleep. To Hunter and to outside observers, Nick's actions seemed generous. He and Montana even told Hunter they would help him get to a bus station in Ontario, Oregon the next day so he could continue his trip. Unfortunately, this kindness was a facade that masked Nick's sinister intentions. Unknown to Hunter, Nick had already begun formulating a deadly plan. He saw an easy target in the trusting teenager and an opportunity to satisfy a disturbing urge. Nick had spoken privately to Keith and possibly to Montana about doing something to the hitchhiker. In text messages later revealed during the investigation, Nick hinted at having a thirst for violence, even suggesting that he intended to kill. He considered Hunter a liar, perhaps because Hunter had not been truthful with his own family about hitchhiking. And in Nick's warped mind, this was justification to end him. These messages show that Nick was premeditating violence, treating the idea of murder as a thrilling prospect rather than a moral abyss. Trip to the desert, from hospitality to horror. The next day, instead of simply dropping Hunter at a bus station as promised, Nick suggested an excursion. He proposed that they all go bunny bumping, a local slang term for hunting jackrabbits in the desert for sport. Hunter, having little experience with firearms or hunting, went along with the plan, likely seeing it as an adventurous detour. Montana and Keith were present as well. They drove out to a remote area near the Bruno Desert, also referred to as the Bruno Desert by locals, in southwestern Idaho, far from any populated areas. This remote canyon area was a place Nick and his friends had gone shooting in the past. At first, the outing seemed recreational. Nick and Keith set up targets and pointed out jackrabbits to shoot. They handed Hunter a rifle, one of Nick's larger guns, encouraging him to try shooting at some distant rocks or small game. Hunter, perhaps eager to fit in or simply enjoy the experience, took aim at a rock and fired the rifle. Montana watched from the vehicle while Nick and Keith flanked Hunter, observing his efforts. There was no indication that Hunter sensed any danger. By all appearances, he was relaxed, maybe even smiling, under the impression that he was among friends engaging in harmless fun. What happened next turned this outing into a nightmare. As Hunter emptied the rifle's magazine while firing at the target, the weapon clicked empty. He turned around, presumably to say something or await instruction, now holding an unloaded gun. At that very moment, Nick seized his chance. Drawing a .45 caliber pistol, a 1911 model handgun he owned and had brought along, Nick aimed at Hunter and shot him without warning. The first bullet tore into Hunter's side near the stomach. Hunter doubled over in pain and shock, dropping the rifle. He cried out, "Why did you do that? Don't kill me!" He pleaded desperately, screaming that he had a child, a frantic attempt to appeal to any humanity in his attacker, the murder of Hunter Smith. Nick's response was merciless. Hunter fell onto his back, injured but still alive, kicking in panic as Nick approached. Instead of hesitating or relenting at the sight of the young man's agony, Nick fired again. He shot Hunter twice more, delivering point-blank gunshots to the victim's head. The echoes of the gunshots faded into the desert silence as Hunter Smith's life was brutally extinguished. The young father who had been moments ago enjoying a thrill of target shooting was now lying dead or dying on the barren ground. During these horrific moments, Montana and Keith were in the vicinity and witnessed the ambush. Montana, sitting in the vehicle, was so horrified that she physically looked away when the shooting started, unable to watch the gruesome execution. Keith, who had stepped out of the car, stood stunned as the scene unfolded. He later recalled being in complete shock, saying he thought Nick was joking earlier but now realized the deadly seriousness of his friend's intent. Both Montana and Keith were effectively bystanders to the murder. Neither participated in the shooting, but neither intervened to stop Nick. It is possible they were frozen by fear, confusion, and disbelief that their friend was capable of such an atrocity. In a matter of minutes, the desert outing had transformed into a crime scene. What makes this crime especially chilling is the apparent lack of any concrete motive beyond Nick's desire to kill. Hunter Smith had done nothing to provoke such violence. He was simply a convenient victim, a stranger who had put his trust in the wrong person. This kind of murder, committed for the thrill or satisfaction it gives the killer, rather than for financial gain or personal enmity, is often referred to by criminologists as a thrill kill. From the perspective of criminal psychology, thrill killings are driven by an internal desire for power and excitement. The perpetrator experiences an adrenaline rush and a sense of omnipotence from deciding someone else's fate. As we will explore later, Nick Vandenberg's actions and later statements align closely with the profile of a thrill killer who kills simply for excitement, typically showing no remorse psychology today.com. The murder of Hunter Smith was swift and unilateral, a one-sided attack that left the victim no chance to defend himself. Once Hunter was incapacitated, Nick's demeanor remained cold and calculated. Keith would later describe how immediately after shooting Hunter in the head, Nick's main concern was collecting the spent shell casings from his pistol to eliminate evidence. In fact, as Hunter lay mortally wounded, with the possibility he might still have been taking final breaths, Nick reloaded and fired another final shot directly into Hunter's face. Nick would claim later that this last shot was to put him out of his misery, but given Nick's overall behavior, it was likely just one more act of dominance in ensuring the job was done. By this point, any doubt about Nick's capacity for extreme violence was erased. He had executed a defenseless teenager in cold blood, showing a callous disregard for the victim's humanity and pleas for mercy. Aftermath at the crime scene. With Hunter Smith dead, Nick immediately switched to covering up the crime. This too reveals aspects of his behavior and mindset. He demonstrated a level of forethought and practicality in the aftermath. He stripped Hunter's body of nearly all clothing, removing the clothes that the victim had worn while staying at Nick's house. Nick believed that by removing the clothing, he would eliminate fibers or traces that could tie the victim to his home or vehicle. This shows that Nick was thinking ahead to a potential police investigation. Evidence of a calculating mind even in the adrenaline-charged moments after a kill. He placed Hunter's clothes except for the underwear into a bag, which he later burned to destroy evidence. This meticulous attention to forensic evidence suggests that Nick had at least some knowledge of how crimes are investigated, and it underscores a cold, pragmatic streak in his personality. Nick also decided to take a personal item from Hunter. He went through the young man's belongings and took his ID, driver's license. Instead of discarding it, Nick kept this identification card. This behavior, taking a trophy from the victim, is significant in criminal psychology. Many serial killers and thrill killers take souvenirs or trophies from their victims, objects that serve as mementos of the kill. According to criminological research, there is a distinction between souvenirs, items kept to relive the fantasy of the crime, and trophies, items kept as a symbol of achievement, oxygen.com. Either way, the purpose is similar. The item allows the killer to feel powerful and to recall the excitement of the crime at a later time. Nick's decision to pocket Hunter's ID, something that had personal value to the victim, can be seen as a trophy-taking behavior. It hints that Nick derived a grim sense of accomplishment from the murder. It is also an ominous sign that psychologically, he might have been inclined to kill again. Keeping a trophy often serves to fuel a killer's fantasies and provides a sense of continued control over the victim. Oxygen.com. Moreover, holding onto a victim's ID or personal item can indicate a killer's overconfidence in evading capture, a trait common in psychopathic individuals. Oxygen.com. Nick likely believed that he could outsmart law enforcement. and that keeping such a souvenir was a risk-free proposition, a grave miscalculation on his part, as we shall see. After stripping the body and gathering evidence, the bullet casings and clothing for disposal, Nick enlisted Keith's help to move Hunter's corpse. Keith later recounted that he didn't want to participate, saying, "I was like, fuck, dude, I don't want to do this," but he felt he had no choice. The two men dragged Hunter's body off to a more concealed spot in the desert brush. The brutality of these actions cannot be overstated. Not only had Nick murdered an innocent young man, but he treated the body with utter indignity, reducing Hunter to the body in his accomplice's words. For Montana and Keith, referring to the victim as the kid or the body was likely a psychological defense mechanism, a way to distance themselves from the horrifying reality that this was a human being like them. Such depersonalization is common in group crimes or atrocities. By stripping away the victim's identity, the perpetrators and witnesses dull their own empathetic responses and guilt. Once the corpse was hidden as best as they could manage in the open desert, Nick and his reluctant accomplices left the scene. The plan, at least from Nick's perspective, was that the desert itself would hide the crime-scavenging animals, the elements, and the vast emptiness of the area might ensure that the remains were never found. For a time, it seemed like this plan had worked. As they drove away from the site of the murder, the outward world had no knowledge of the dark secret that Nick, Montana, and Keith carried with them. But secrets, especially those as heinous as murder, have a way of coming to light. The psychological burden on Montana and Keith was enormous. They had just witnessed a killing and helped, even if under duress, to cover it up, and both were shaken and fearful. Nick, on the other hand, was unfazed and even strangely calm. In fact, according to later accounts, he described the act of killing as a stress relief, as though murdering Hunter had alleviated some internal tension or fulfilled a dark desire within him. This chilling reaction speaks volumes. While any normal person would be distraught or horrified after taking a life, Nick appeared contented, having scratched an itch that most people could never comprehend. Discovery and investigation. For several weeks after June 2017, Hunter Smith's family and friends were left in agonizing uncertainty. When Hunter stopped contacting his loved ones after June 20th, they grew concerned. By early August, Hunter's mother and aunt reported him missing, as no one had heard from him since his last message stating he was in Burns, Oregon, and planning to catch a bus. The unfortunate reality was that Hunter never made it to Nebraska. He had vanished without a trace after crossing paths with Nick. For 4 long months, his family held out hope that he might still be alive, even as the chances seemed to dwindle with each passing day. Discovery of the body. The truth began to emerge in late October 2017. On October 21st, hunters exploring the remote Bruno Desert area in Owyhee County, Idaho, came across human remains. The desert's vastness had concealed Hunter's body for a time, but eventually nature and chance brought it to light. The remains were in a state that clearly indicated foul play. This was no accident or natural death. Law enforcement was called to the scene. Investigators noted that the body matched the general description of the missing 18-year-old from Oregon, though formal identification was required. Using DNA testing, comparing the DNA of the remains with a sample from Hunter's mother, authorities confirmed what Hunter's family had dreaded. The body found in the desert was indeed Hunter Tash Smith. The cause of death appeared to have been anything but natural, and based on the estimated age of the deceased, Idaho State Police believed that the remains could potentially be those of the missing young man. DNA from Hunter's mother was compared against that of the unidentified body, and the confirmation soon came. Sadly, the remains were those of Hunter. With the terrible news, the family's worst nightmare became reality, and all hope that he'd someday return was lost. The discovery of Hunter's body turned the missing person case into a murder investigation. This development sent shockwaves through the community and spurred an urgent search for answers. Who had killed Hunter, and why? The location where the body was found provided a critical clue. It was near an area where locals, including Nick Vandenberg and his circle, often went shooting and bunny bumping. The brutality of the killing, multiple gunshots, partially clothed remains in the desert, suggested a callous and possibly experienced offender. Rumors began to circulate in Owyhee County about the disturbing find. One particular lead, out of the many received shortly after news of the somber discovery was made public, captured the full attention of law enforcement. A man by the name of Nick Vandenberg had shared a local news story on Facebook about the body being found. Nick's own suspicious behavior. In what can only be described as a brazen and macabre attempt at humor, Nick commented publicly, "If it was me, I wouldn't have left him in the desert, LOL. Too much risk of someone stumbling on a dead body, LOL." This shocking comment, making light of a tragedy and speculating about hiding a body, was a huge red flag. It was not the kind of thing someone would expected to read about such a grim discovery, especially from a local. Law enforcement certainly couldn't ignore it. Why would Nick say, "If it was me, I wouldn't leave him in the desert," unless he had thought about or knew something about how and where the victim was left? His flippant remark hinted at insider knowledge of the crime scene and a sense of bravado about getting away with murder. Psychologically, Nick's social media comment reveals his overconfidence and lack of empathy. Publicly joking about a young man's death displays a complete disregard for the victim and the victim's family, and it aligns with the kind of psychopath's overconfidence experts note. The belief that one can taunt others and still evade consequences. Oxygen.com. Nick likely derived a perverse thrill from dropping this clue in plain sight, testing whether authorities would catch on. Such behavior is reminiscent of certain serial killers, like the Zodiac Killer or Dennis Rader BTK, who sent taunting messages to police or media, motivated by a desire for attention and a sense of intellectual superiority. While Nick's Facebook comment was far less sophisticated, it still demonstrated a similar psychological drive, the need to flaunt his achievement and to feel smarter than everyone else. Unsurprisingly, law enforcement took note of Nick's comment and began looking at him more closely. At this point, detectives were gathering a list of people who might have been connected to Hunter's travel route or last known whereabouts. Nick's name surfaced not only due to the Facebook comment, but also via word-of-mouth leads in the community. Owyhee County is a small, close-knit area. Once news of the body spread, Gossip pointed to Nick as someone who had been talking strangely about the case. Additionally, it was known among some locals that Nick had hosted a hitchhiker, which matched the description of Hunter, around the time Hunter went missing. The pieces were coming together. Nick Vandenberg had opportunity, picking up the hitchhiker. Proximity, he lived near where the body was found and often went shooting in that desert. And now he was exhibiting suspicious behavior and comments. Initial police contact with Montana Reed. Investigators decided to follow up by speaking to people close to Nick. One of the first was Nick's ex-girlfriend, 20-year-old Montana Reed, who had lived with him earlier that year. By late October 2017, Montana was no longer living in Nick's house. She had moved out a couple of months prior due to personal conflicts, partly involving another woman named Letitia, who had become involved with Nick. When detectives approached Montana on October 24, 2017, she agreed to talk with them. At first, the conversation was casual and addressed how and why Montana had come to live with Nick. She explained that Nick had a lot of anger from his childhood and bragged about his military service, claiming he had killed enemy combatants, claims which Montana hinted were dubious. She also mentioned that Nick had a habit of welcoming friends or acquaintances in need into his home. For instance, Willie Keith Raby, who had recently had a baby and had been in jail, was staying with Nick after his release. The detectives listened patiently, but soon they steered the interview toward the real issue at hand, the body in the desert and Nick's possible involvement. When asked if she had heard about the news article on the body that was found, Montana said she had seen people posting about it on Facebook. She even noted Nick's own post, commenting that Nick had said something like it was pretty much in my backyard. Montana appeared to find Nick's interest in the discovery odd, saying, "I don't know why he would be talking about something like that if he didn't do it." However, at this stage, Montana played innocent or at least uninformed. She repeatedly expressed disbelief that Nick could be accused of murder. "Oh my gosh, this is so crazy that he's being accused of this," she said, even as the detective had not directly accused Nick yet. It seemed that Montana was nervous, possibly hiding something but not yet ready to reveal what she knew. The detective asked pointedly about activities like bunny bumping. Montana confirmed that going out shooting rabbits in the desert was something Nick, and often Keith, liked to do. The detective then asked if Montana knew whether Nick and Keith ever went out shooting around the time the murder would have occurred, late June or early July 2017. Montana acknowledged they had gone out to that area near the Bruno Desert occasionally, but she did not volunteer any information about the hitchhiker at first. She insisted that Nick had never shown a violent side to her personally and maintained an air of perplexity about the situation. However, the investigators could sense that Montana was holding back. As the interview progressed, the detective put mild pressure on her, saying things like, "If you knew that he did this, would you tell me?" Montana insisted she would, that she wouldn't want to get in trouble for withholding such information. She continued to downplay knowledge of any wrongdoing, suggesting that if Nick did it, he must be a bad person. But she also floated the possibility that he might not be involved at all. Before ending the interview, the detective gave Montana a stern piece of advice. He told her to stay away from Nick and not discuss the case with him or anyone else. This advice was both a protective warning and a subtle test. If Montana truly knew nothing, contacting Nick wouldn't benefit her. If she was involved or had knowledge, she might feel compelled to warn Nick, which would in turn raise further suspicion on both of them. As it turned out, Montana did exactly what the detective suspected. She contacted Nick almost immediately after their talk. Montana breaks. Her silence. The very next day, on October 25th, detectives brought Montana in for a second interview. By now, they had reason to believe she knew more than she initially admitted, especially since evidence was mounting and Montana had, against advice, spoken to Nick. In this second meeting, Montana's guard began to slip. She admitted she had texted with Nick after the first interview. Notably, Montana said she routinely deleted all her text messages, which in itself is suspicious behavior. Deleting communications can suggest a consciousness of guilt, a legal concept that indicates someone may be aware of their own wrongdoing and is trying to hide evidence of it. Montana claimed that Nick had messaged her first and that she tried to keep the conversation short. It was clear to detectives that Montana was very anxious. The interrogator subtly hinted that they were aware she wasn't telling the whole truth. "I know you were living at the house when this happened. I don't know how you wouldn't know at least something." The pressure was mounting. Montana's responses were inconsistent. At one moment, she'd express shock at the idea of Nick being a killer, and at another, she'd imply that certain things point to possibly he did do it. Caught in this push-pull of protecting Nick versus coming clean, Montana finally cracked. Overwhelmed and likely realizing that the police already had substantial information, she blurted out, "I was there." With those 3 words, Montana Reed's role in the case shifted from a potentially uninvolved bystander to an eyewitness and accomplice. This was a turning point in the investigation. Once Montana confessed to being present during the crime, a flood of details followed. She tearfully recounted the nightmarish outing, how Nick had brought Hunter home, how they all went shooting in the desert, and how Nick shot the hitchhiker, whom she did not know by name, multiple times. Montana admitted that she couldn't bring herself to watch when Nick pulled the trigger. She turned away and covered her ears. She confirmed that Keith was with them, and that neither she nor Keith had any prior warning that Nick was actually going to murder the young man. It's worth noting that Montana's claim that she had no idea a murder was coming is somewhat contradicted by her later admission that Nick and Keith had talked about doing something to the hitchhiker beforehand. It appears she realized something bad might happen, but perhaps did not let herself believe it until it was too late. Montana's confession poured out in fits and starts. She expressed that she didn't want Nick to get in trouble and didn't want to go to jail herself, but at the same time she knew keeping the secret was wrong. She told investigators about the aftermath of the shooting, how Nick removed Hunter's clothes and burned them, how he collected the bullet casings, and how he dragged the body into the brush. Her account corroborated much of the physical evidence. For example, the discovered remains were missing clothing, which matched her story of Nick stripping the body. She also mentioned the chilling detail that Nick kept the victim's driver's license as a keepsake. What Montana revealed painted Nick Vandenberg as a calculating killer who had callously executed a harmless teenager and meticulously tried to eliminate evidence. It also established that Keith Raby was directly involved in the incident, even if not as a shooter. Armed with Montana's testimony, the police now turned their focus to finding and interviewing Keith, who had been evading law enforcement due to unrelated warrants. Keith Raby's interrogation. Willie Keith Raby was tracked down by police soon after Montana's confession. On October 26, 2017, Keith was brought in for questioning. At the outset, detectives made it clear to Keith that he was considered a witness rather than a suspect in the murder, a strategic move to encourage him to talk without a lawyer or without fear of immediate arrest for the murder itself. Keith was already facing legal trouble for other matters, the reason he'd been on the run, and now he was confronted with this far more serious situation. He walked into the interrogation room knowing that whatever he said could determine not only his fate in this case, but also whether he might be charged for murder alongside Nick. Keith's initial demeanor was guarded. He attempted to distance himself from Nick, emphasizing that he didn't know Nick extremely well and that they weren't lifelong friends. They'd known each other around 5 or 6 years and had a significant age gap between them. This was a subtle way for Keith to suggest he shouldn't be assumed to know everything about Nick's actions. He downplayed their closeness. "I didn't really hang out with kids that were super young. I don't think Nick really was the point." He portrayed their relationship as coincidental rather than deeply bonded, perhaps hoping to avoid guilt by association. Once the detectives made it clear they already had information from Montana and others, Keith began to open up. As he was about to start telling the story, he rubbed his face and eyes, a classic eye-blocking behavior. Not only was this a sign that he was uncomfortable, but it also acted as a barrier between him and the detective, and perhaps an attempt to avoid looking directly at the detective while he lied or relived traumatic details. Keith corroborated Montana's story in its essential details. Nick had picked up a hitchhiker and brought him back to the house. They went out rabbit hunting, and then Nick turned his gun on the unsuspecting young man. Keith's description of the actual shooting was harrowing. He described how the hitchhiker, Hunter, had fired the rifle at a rock until it was empty, and as he turned back, Nick, behaving very differently than his usual self, his persona was different, Keith noted, drew his .45 pistol and shot the kid in the side. Keith recalled the victim's desperate plea, the young man crying out, "Why did you do that? Don't F*** and kill me. I have a kid," which matched Montana's account of Hunter begging for his life. Keith then detailed how Nick walked up and shot the victim twice in the head as he lay on the ground. Their accounts matched on this crucial point. Nick executed Hunter mercilessly. One detail Keith mentioned that hadn't been clear before was that Montana was actually present at the exact scene, sitting in the car a few feet away at the time of the killing. Montana had initially implied she might not have been right there when the trigger was pulled, possibly to minimize her direct witness of the violence. "I didn't watch it happen, I looked away." But Keith confirmed she was indeed there, just turning away. This consistency between their stories, that all three were present and that Nick was solely responsible for the shooting, helped solidify the case. Keith also added that after the initial shots, when the victim was still breathing, Nick delivered a final shot to the face to make sure he was dead, the so-called mercy shot in Nick's retelling. After the murder, Keith said Nick immediately started scanning the ground for the shell casings from his pistol. This detail of Nick's behavior, being composed enough to think about evidence right after murdering someone, reinforced the image of Nick as cold-blooded and calculating. When it came to his own role, Keith was somewhat remorseful and defensive. He admitted helping Nick drag the body and remove evidence, but he insisted he had done so under duress and shock. Keith said something to the effect of, "I know I probably should have done something to stop it, but I didn't know what the fuck to do." He expressed that he absolutely hadn't wanted any part of murder and that he felt stuck and scared in the moment. In psychological terms, Keith's reaction could be seen as a combination of fear, helplessness, and a kind of trauma-induced compliance. He knew what was happening was horribly wrong, but he lacked the courage or clarity to intervene or later report it. This is not an uncommon response for individuals who find themselves unexpectedly in the presence of extreme violence orchestrated by someone they know. The shock can paralyze, and fear of becoming the next target can silence. "Indeed," Keith said, "I sure as fuck don't want to be in that situation. I should have fucking done something, but I don't know what the fuck to do." His profanity-laced regret underscored how overwhelmed and guilt-ridden he felt. By the end of his interrogation, Keith had placed himself, Montana, and Nick at the scene and confirmed Nick as the shooter. Importantly, he also shared that Nick had texted him the night of the incident, implying an intention to kill. Keith revealed that Nick had messaged him something along the lines of having a thirst to kill and calling the hitchhiker a liar who he was going to end. Initially, Keith thought Nick was just fucking joking or exaggerating, but retrospectively, it became clear these texts were genuine declarations of murderous intent. This evidence of premeditation that Nick communicated his desire and plan to kill beforehand was damning. It highlighted Nick's mindset as one of actively planning a thrill kill, not an impulsive act of self-defense or rage. It also shows that Nick sought validation or at least acknowledgement from Keith before the act, possibly as a way to normalize what he was about to do or ensure Keith's complicity. With Montana's and Keith's testimonies aligning and reinforcing one another, the investigators had more than enough cause to arrest Nick Vandenberg. They had eyewitness accounts, corroborating physical evidence, and even Nick's own incriminating social media antics. The stage was set to confront the killer himself and hear his side of the story, if he was willing to talk. Interrogation of Nick Vandenberg and his confession, armed with the evidence gathered from Montana and Keith, as well as the physical evidence and Nick's own incriminating online comments, detectives approached Nick Vandenberg. They located him that same afternoon on October 26, 2017, and brought him in for questioning. At this point, investigators had a solid case building, but obtaining a confession from Nick would further cement the prosecution and possibly reveal additional insights into his psychological state. Nick's initial demeanor. During his interrogation, Nick tried to appear calm and cooperative, but subtle signs indicated he was on edge. Observers noted that he held his body very still, almost rigidly, as he sat in the interview room. This kind of unnatural stillness can be a fight-or-flight response, as if his body froze upon sensing the threat of being caught. When someone encounters a threat, they may momentarily freeze in an instinctual attempt to avoid detection, much like a prey animal staying still to avoid a predator's notice. Nick's stillness suggested he was in a high state of alert internally, even as he outwardly tried to project confidence. Nick likely realized that he was a suspect. After all, by this time, he might have known Montana and Keith were talking to the police. Montana had hinted to him on the phone that police were asking about the hitchhiker, and he certainly knew about the body being found. Still, he maintained a friendly and open facade at first, perhaps hoping he could talk his way out of suspicion. The detectives began by casually talking about the discovery of the body in the desert, without immediately accusing Nick of anything. They mentioned the find in a general way and said they were trying to figure out who the person was and what happened. Nick volunteered that he had seen the press release on Facebook about the remains being found. He did not yet know, or pretended not to know, that the victim was identified as Hunter Smith. When the officers hinted that Nick's name had come up as somebody who might know something about the deceased, Nick did not react with overt surprise. Instead, he readily launched into a prepared narrative about his encounter with a hitchhiker. This was a clear sign that Nick anticipated being questioned and had crafted a story in advance. According to Nick's initial tale, he admitted that he had indeed picked up a hitchhiker that summer, implicitly acknowledging Hunter's presence with him. He described meeting the young man, though he did not use Hunter's name, referring to him generally, and bringing him home out of kindness. Nick told the detectives that he, Montana, and Keith gave the hitchhiker a meal and a place to sleep for the night. He even mentioned details like how the hitchhiker had been pretty tired and dirty and was grateful for a shower painting a picture of friendly hospitality. Nick claimed that the next day he had personally driven the hitchhiker to a gas station in Mountain Home, Idaho, the Chevron station specifically, after the young man made an off-putting comment towards Montana. Crucially, Nick added a detail that no one else had mentioned. He said the hitchhiker had made a sexual or inappropriate remark about Montana, something flirtatious or suggestive that made her uncomfortable. He implied that this was why he cut the visit short and drove the hitchhiker away sooner than planned. This insertion is telling. It appears to be an attempt by Nick to cast the hitchhiker in a negative light and provide a reason for distancing himself from the hitchhiker's fate, as if to preemptively explain why the hitchhiker was last seen with him but then left in a hurry. It also subtly casts Nick as the protective boyfriend who got rid of a creeper, which is a much more innocent narrative than being a murderer. In truth, this detail was almost certainly fabricated. Neither Montana nor Keith ever mentioned Hunter behaving inappropriately. The fact that Nick injected this into the story shows his manipulative thinking. He was already trying to shape the narrative to his advantage by painting himself as a defender of propriety rather than an aggressor. Nick further claimed that after dropping the hitchhiker off at the Chevron in Mountain Home, he gave him $20 for bus fare and never saw him again. He acted as though he was concerned when he later learned, supposedly through a missing persons poster or news, that the hitchhiker vanished. Nick's story had him as the Good Samaritan who helped a traveler and parted on good terms. Throughout this initial statement, Nick was very specific with certain details, like the location, the amount of money, etc., which can sometimes be a sign of rehearsed lies, adding seemingly precise touches to make a story sound convincing. Detectives confront Nick with contradictions. The investigators let Nick tell his entire story without interruption. This technique is common in interrogations. They allowed him to lie and weave his tale fully, so that later they could confront him with its inconsistencies and the evidence to the contrary. Once Nick finished his account, the detectives began to chip away at it.